How to Train a Happy Mind is a nonprofit project supported entirely by your donations. If you've ever enjoyed one of our podcast episodes, community, or classes, please consider making a tax-deductible donation of any size right now on our website at howtotrainahappymind.org. On the website, you can also find links to purchase the book based on the podcast, How to Train a Happy Mind, or join our Train a Happy Mind community that meets weekly for lectures, meditations, and discussions. I'm Scott Snibbe, and this is How to Train a Happy Mind, where we share practical ideas from Buddhism to build happier lives, stronger relationships, and a better world. The ancient word yogi, or yogini in its female form, refers to someone who's dedicated their life to inner transformation through meditation. They often spend years or even decades in solitary retreat. My teacher and friend Paula Chichester is one of the vanishingly few modern people who has chosen to live such a life of isolation and inner adventure. And it was my honor recently to speak with her about her life's journey. In our conversation, Paula talks about balancing the inner development fostered by meditation with the outer transformation of social action. She talks about the joys and challenges of long-term retreat and the practicalities of how to pay for it, how to find support, and how to cheer yourself up with a one-person party when things get tough. So Paula, thank you so much for joining me on A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment. I first met you at a retreat in 2006. I took a Vajrasattva retreat that you led at Vajrapani when I was getting divorced, which was a good time to do purification. So thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for asking me. Let's hope we can do something interesting for people. Yeah, but it's always nice to see you. You're a good guy. I like to talk to you.
Thank you for saying that. Saying that. So Paula, you're one of the few people I know who's dedicated the majority of your life to meditation practice. In our lineage, we call this type of person a yogi, or in your case, a yogini. And I'd love if you could start out by talking about what led you to what for most of us would seem a very unconventional lifestyle.
I am a product of my environment, really. I mean, where I was born, my parents were from the South and very racist, deep South, Macon, Georgia. And my father moved his family to Berkeley, California, the most opposite place you could imagine, when I was almost 6. He went to school, graduate school, and then they were, I would almost say, students, followers of Martin Luther King. And so then we went back to the South for 3 more years where my parents were activists. And so, of course, that really influenced me as a child. And also, I think I was really influenced by Martin Luther King myself, as my parents were. But then I've always been a person that's more interested in experience and experiential learning, and I learned through experience. When I was 14 at West Campus at Berkeley High School, we had a class where there were like 20 of us, and we sat around in a circle and we read 2 books out loud. We read the Bhagavad Gita, and we read the Compassionate Teachings of Buddha. So you have to remember, this is like 1968, right? The Beatles had gone to India, and this whole culture of looking for alternative realities. And I mean, I hadn't taken psychedelics or anything, but it was around, you know. And so that really influenced me as well. And the teacher was an Indian Sikh named Mr. Dillon. And then one of those weekends, might have been Easter weekend, we went down to Big Sur, and I decided I would try and meditate. I didn't know what it was, but I just decided I would try and, meditate. And so I have this really profound experience. I really felt like I was one with everything. And when we came back, there was something really different changed. I went to every adult I knew to try to explain to me what it was, and nobody could explain it to me. But at the same time, I wanted to move into the closet because I wanted to have a cave. So we had one of these closets at our house on Parker Street under the staircase, and it was big enough that I could live in it, So I wanted to move in this closet because I wanted to live in a cave. And so I ended up going to UC Berkeley. They had an extraordinary environmental studies program that was actually run by Pacifica Radio activists. So it was like training young people to be environmental warriors, really. So my freshman year, we had this class where they introduced us to the systems approach and thinking in systems. And it was this extraordinary man named Arnold Schultz, who was one of the first scientists, biologists, to work in the world of ecology. And so I got very interested in that because, I love nature, but basically what he taught was that everything is dependent upon everything else. Where does a tree start and where does the sky begin? And that trees are merely labeled on the fact that it's, that we see it as a tree, but where is the tree? That was happening for me before I met Buddhism. My generation and my friends were all part of this movement to try to do something. But Arnold Schultz made it really clear that the way we think, our epistemological system, isn't going to answer the questions. He said that he could teach engineers, he would ask them if they could build a pipe that would take blood from Israel to England, they would do it without thinking about what it was, or, that people just get stuck into their little disciplines and don't discuss with each other and don't see the big picture and don't think about the outcomes. And it's sort of like just big boys with their toys, A few years later, I meet Lama Yeshe, and there he was, the perfect person who was teaching us how to think outside the box and how to integrate intuitive learning and intuitive understanding with intellectual understanding, and that here was a system that used both. He was also pointing to the idea that we can learn to be intuitive. We can learn skills that get us to think in ways that aren't just intellectual understanding, and that we can use our intellectual understanding to launch us into another realm of gnosis, of knowing, which now I would call three-dimensional learning. Whereas what we learn in school is two-dimensional or even one-dimensional. It's like we learn a bunch of information, we take a test, we spit it out, we learn it all really well, and suddenly we have a PhD and we know it all. Well, Buddhism's not like that at all. With Buddhism, you have to do that first or along the way. But at the same time, you're incorporating it deeply into your understanding, where it transforms your whole outlook and your whole being and even your body, and that you use your body and you use your mind so it's a different approach to learning and understanding. And so that's what excited me about the Dharma.
You could have easily become an outward, like, environmental activist. And then you also had this choice to go inward, to become some kind of an inward activist through Buddhist practice. And you went so deeply, even into many years, decades of solitary retreat. Could you unpack a little that decision for people who might be wondering about those choices?
Yeah, well, the reason was that they told us, I ended up going to India a couple of years after I met Lama Yeshe, and he set up these 3 incredible programs with his teachers. Maybe you've heard about an Enlightened Experience Celebration. And at this time, they would tell you, oh, you can get enlightened in 3 years if you do a 3-year retreat. So at the time, I was still working with this professor I was talking about, Arnold Schultz, that I just loved. And he had convinced me to get into a PhD interdisciplinary program at Berkeley, work in all the different disciplines. And because I was going to try to come up with a way to actually teach emptiness, to teach meditation to scientists. But when I learned what I learned for those 6 months in India, I felt like that to really explore this other way of being and thinking and learning, that I couldn't do it in a university, that I really needed to get out and to just explore this completely And doing solitary retreat was the method that they recommended. So I didn't come to it from a religious thing at all. I came to it from someone who wanted to understand how the mind works and how we could change the world, because this was the time of Stuart Brand and the alternative paradigm and how we need to find a new paradigm shift to create a different world, And I was like, yes, I was completely signed up for that. And the other thing was that because they told us you could get enlightened in 3 years, I thought that I could go off and do retreat, for maybe 10 years or something, and then come back. But the thing was, it turned out I was gone for more like 25 years, because I did one retreat and they said do another retreat. And then, and finally, in 2005, Lama Zopa Rinpoche finally looked at me and he said, oh, you finished, Now you need to go benefit sentient beings. But by then, I was in my 50s and I had no idea how I could get back into the world that I had left. I didn't have any traction anymore. And I couldn't really navigate that world without feeling like I was losing what I had gained. And also, I found out later that back in the 70s, when I was a biologist and an ecologist, I worked out in the desert surveying plants and soils in southern Utah, and I got uranium poisoning. Thank you very much, U.S. government, because there's uranium poisoning all over that part of the world. In fact, I was just in Arizona, and there were signs everywhere for the Navajo. Have you had your uranium testing yet? And they're postponing it till June. Well, I didn't know. It took me years to find out that was what was wrong with me. But because of that, I'm really sensitive to electronics. And so for me to enter back into the world where I had to be in front of a computer or talking on telephones, I couldn't do it. So in some ways, then that made me stay on the outside even longer than I thought it would be.
I wonder if you could share any specific moments of insight, during your years of solitary retreat, specific moments of insight, and also any specifically difficult moments. Most people I know who've gone through solitary retreat have very, very dark, difficult moments. So what are a couple of the highs and lows of that experience?
Well, I didn't really have such difficult moments. And I think it was because, well, for one part of it, for the first part, I traveled this journey with a partner. And although we didn't, really live together or stay in the same houses, you see, we met each other. His name's Roger Munro, and he's still in retreat, by the way. It's pretty amazing. He's been in retreat now for 10 years. We met in India, and we both wanted to do this. And we didn't know anybody else that wanted to go into long retreat. And so we said, well, let's help each other, because it was very difficult back then to try to figure out how you're going to do this. And I had a little money and he had a little money. And then in the end, we ended up asking people to support us, which is something else I'd like to talk to you about how I think it's important to support meditators and not expect them to support themselves, because that's impossible. But because I had the background that I had, and I also think all through those years in Berkeley, studied dance and Qigong and yoga. And I really believe very deeply that so much of what goes on in meditation is it's physical. And so much of being alone by yourself, if you're just sitting and meditating, if you don't circulate your qi, if you don't work with your organs and your energy and everything, then that gets very stagnant and that makes you depressed. And so I would have 4 meditation sessions every day, but I also had 4 exercise sessions every day. I did prostrations one session, I did Qigong one session, I went for a walk one session, I did yoga in the evenings. And the other thing that I did was, because I have good friends, I was introduced to an author called John Bradshaw, and I don't know if you remember him, but he's a psychologist who was very popular in the 80s on PBS, on KQED in San Francisco. And he was, I think, one of the earlier psychologists that taught about healing your inner child and trauma and how you go about working with those issues. And so I took his books into my retreat with me. So a lot of my retreat, it wasn't just strict Buddhism, but I did a lot of inner child healing work. And his book called Homecoming and Healing the Shame That Binds You, that were written in the 80s, they're still really good books. And so, because a lot of the issues that come up for people in retreat is because two things. One, that their physical energy isn't balanced. And two, you have all these psychological issues that haven't been addressed. And I think another thing that was really beneficial for me was the fact that I'd studied systems thinking. Mm-hmm. And also that when I was in graduate school, I was actually training or studying or working. What I wanted to do was be of service in third world countries. And so what we looked at, I had another really wonderful professor, and what we studied was how it went wrong. When USAID would go into countries and say, you know, now we're going to give you this. And it always came down to the fact that they didn't look at the culture. Mm-hmm. You know, they would take the technology and put it in a culture where the technology didn't fit. So I turned that around. So you take the technology of, because it is technology, it's, you know, it's a form of intellectual technology that you're putting into our culture. And so it doesn't really work in our culture. And
yeah, Robert Thurman calls it spiritual technology.
Yeah, well, it is. I think it is spiritual technology, but it's also, it's more than spiritual, though. I think it's very scientific as well. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's psychological and spiritual and scientific and physical. So I looked at the Tibetan world and it's like, wow, you know, they didn't have poisonous houses. They didn't drive cars. They didn't even have clocks, you know? And so I just could try to kind of adapt my life to make it fit more to their situation. And also, Lama Yeshe was such a great teacher. I mean, I was so blessed to have him as a teacher because he kind of taught me the essence, but he also said over and over and over again, forget Tibetan culture. You must take it into your own self and create Western Dharma. So I didn't feel like I needed to become a Tibetan. I didn't feel like I needed to get ordained. I didn't feel like I needed to try to be like them at all. I do all my stuff in English, you know. So there are many factors, the body, the psychology, looking at the environment, the outer environment that I was in. And also I gave myself something fun to do. So it's really important to have fun and retreat. And Roger coined the term, the one-person party. You have to perfect the art of the one-person party. And you can have you can. And I have to say, when we did the first long retreat, we didn't do it together and we were separated and we didn't speak, but just knowing there was somebody else doing it helped, you know. And they say in the Tibetan text that when you do solitary retreat, it should be a group of yogis. It shouldn't be just one person off by themselves, and that they can meet from time to time and just kind of help each other that way. The second time I did a 4-year retreat, I was completely alone, and that was more challenging, you know. I did go through lonely parts, but if it got really bad, like one of the things I would allow myself to do is I had a radio. So I'd let myself listen to music once a week and dance, you know. In 1991, I just thought, maybe it'd be nice to have a guitar, because I used to play guitar when I was a teenager and sing folk songs. So I wrote songs, you know, and that creative process. And it was just a delight to me because I didn't write songs. You know, I would just sit there and I'd be doing my session. At the end of the session, I said, oh, I feel a song coming. And I'd sit down and there just a song would pour out of me. So I just found a way to keep myself delighted and happy. And I remember I cut my finger really bad in my first really long retreat. And as I watched it heal, because it took months, you know, I cut it with a knife, you know. And I thought, well, you know, the mind is just like my finger. You know, it's not like you can just learn 5 of these and memorize them and then you have them. you have to learn the 5 of these and memorize them, but they have to become so much a part of you that that's how you think and feel, and that's how you respond. And also about patience and perseverance and generosity, and so you begin to apply these things yourself. And the other thing is, I had some great teachers, and one of the things they told me was, it was Genla Rinpa was his name, but I had the good fortune to meet him because he was one of those great yogis that, achieved completion stage in one lifetime and could, do blazing and dripping and change his part. I mean, he was, total. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. That's what I thought I could do in 3 years. Can you believe that?
Well, we're told we can, but they didn't say it's easy, but they said it's possible.
But anyway, and he taught me 2 things. One, that in retreat you don't drink caffeine. Mm. And the second thing is you sleep as much as you need to. And he said that, those retreats, when you do them in the monastery or when you do them in a group at like Vajrapani Institute, you have a schedule you have to keep to, and you're in a group and you have to do it, and you like cram to get it finished in 3 weeks. So I think a lot of people take that into a longer period of time and don't realize that when you embark into the yogi's life, you have to listen to your body and do what your body can do and not push yourself, because you can't push yourself with coffee or tea or chocolate or sugar for that amount of time. You really have to make friends with yourself. So that means that you have to let all your demons out, which then means that you have to have a way to heal that, which is why I found John Bradshaw's books good, or now there's so many healers, Gabor Mate and Sarah Payton and all these people that help. But just the basic kind of thing of sitting and being with yourself and accepting, okay, I made a mistake, but it's okay, I'm okay, I'm not bad, I'm not a bad person. So until you accept that you're not a bad person on a deep, 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 deep level, which in our Judeo-Christian society, we really have to work at least for most people.
So can you talk about one of the ways over several decades, what's the way that you saw yourself change in a way that you were really happy with, like comparing yourself being in your teens or 20s to several decades later? What's one of those transformations?
Well, I would just say I have some really good long-term friends, and what they would say is that I'm kinder, I'm more flexible, I'm more patient, I'm happier, I'm content, and I'm able to help people more. That's about it, really.
What more can you ask for? Yeah. And you had this motivation, this activist motivation, to help the planet, to fight injustice. You've clearly helped one person, at least very, very much yourself, which is like the most important, you have to start with that. Yeah. How has that impacted your ability to help others, like in those dimensions that you really cared about from your whole life too?
Well, I think that's kind of a disappointment, I suppose, on my part, was that, like I explained before, I for example, at Jamyang, they had this climate change meeting recently, and I wanted to go, and maybe I will go to the next one. But because everything now demands so much time online, and it just really makes me sick. So that's been a kind of a disappointment for me. And also, I had hoped that maybe I could, reach more people. But in about 2017, I guess it was, I'd sort of been teaching before, but Lama Zopa Rinpoche made it very clear that he wanted me out in the world, and, he wanted me to help his students. And so I do teach around the world, but it's a really small group of people, So then I thought, do you remember the book? The 100th Monkey was a story about a zoologist who was studying an island in Japan, a small island in Japan of monkeys. And when one monkey learned to use a tool to crack open the nuts, she would teach her children and it would spread out. But once it got to be 100 monkeys, the whole island knew it. So the idea, I guess, is that even though I'm just teaching small groups, that maybe those people who are activists and are out into the world, that the things that I can help them with, if I can help them to be more flexible and kind and aware and with their own inner issues and help them with their own inner practice, that maybe that will filter out into the world.
In a lot of ways, there's greater difficulties in the world now than ever before. One of the encouraging things is so many people seeing that at a young age and dedicating their lives to it. I see so many young people, my nieces and nephews and friends' kids all want to go into social justice activism, environmental activism. From your lessons, what would you say to those kind of people who are like starting out trying to be effective activists? What can they learn from these traditions that we practice on how to do that better, how to actually be effective, and also how not to burn out and how not to be enraged and so on?
Well, I used to have this fantasy that what I'd really love to do would just teach a meditation course for activists, because there's a few things I think you can learn from meditation. And what kind of turned me off politics was I think I was about 14 and I was involved in Robert Kennedy's election, and I was there when the assassination happened and all that. But just that little foray into politics and activism, I just saw how people's egos, like the whole problem was people's egos. Like they couldn't agree on stuff. And there were people there who it was all about them. And so I really feel very strongly that if activism is to work, we have to learn to work together. And what Buddhism will teach people is to know how to get your own ego out of the way, how to learn to listen to people, how to learn to recognize when you're just about yourself and you've forgotten that it's about the group.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to see you make that course. Sounds amazing. The course for to make a compassionate activist or something, wise compassionate activist. That sounds very beneficial.
It was just like, where could you do it? You'd have to have a venue that wasn't Buddhist.
Yeah.
That's the thing, you'd have to figure out how you could do it.
Yeah. Well, maybe we do it. I want to go back to one personal thing, which is interesting, is that, you were, in one sense, I don't quite understand your level of ordination, because when I met you, you were Venerable Ninja. You were very unconventional, though. You had, you had hair, and I remember seeing you at Vajrapani just go and kind of lay down a yoga mat and just sort of sit there and sleep out looking up at the stars all night long. So how were you ordained exactly, and how did you become not ordained?
Yeah, well, as you can see, I wasn't really that into it. And I very much respect those people who choose that, and I think, but you can hear from my life story, I wasn't interested in religion. Just look at what they do, it's just
a lot of bad, yeah.
And so I never really wanted to become a Buddhist, I just wanted to become a wise member of the world and bring Buddhism into more of a well-accepted, unreligious place, because I don't feel like the Dalai Lama said, it's not really religious. It has religious aspects, and that's really great for people who want that, who want to belong to a club and, have a church and whatever, And so Lama Zopa Rinpoche, my spiritual advisor, and he is an advisor, and he's been a wonderful advisor. And although I just said, I'm not religious, I do have a teacher, a guru, but I also had advisors in graduate school. It was suggested that do a second retreat to help clear away the obstacles to realizations. And so, of course, why would you not do, of course, you say yes, so, but then Lama Zopa Rinpoche could see that there were obstacles coming to be able to do it. So he advised that we get ordained before we do the second retreat. So it was kind of like a entrance fee or something like that, and I wasn't particularly interested in it, but I wanted to do the retreat. And so I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And so I did, and, but to be honest, I I didn't really like wearing a uniform and being different. And especially I didn't like the special treatment you get, like you're supposed to be somebody holy and special, and because you're not, So I didn't really appreciate any of that. So I would do it when I would go to the Dharma centers. And then when I didn't, I would just sort of be myself, even though I didn't have much hair. Then everybody thought I was a lesbian. So it's like I had a choice. I could either have an identity as a lesbian or as a nun. So it was kind of anyways. But then after that retreat was over, I told you I was kind of shocked because I couldn't really figure out how I could integrate back into the world anyway. I didn't want to go and get a job. What kind of a job would I had? I already created my job. I was doing this, so it just made more sense to stay ordained. But I got to the point where when I got to be 60, when you turn 60, it's kind of like, I've heard this from other people, you get to the point where you can't do things for other people anymore. And I was doing this because I thought it was what Lama Zopa Rinpoche had thought was better for me. So when I checked with him, he didn't seem to care at all. He said, oh, when I saw you playing music, I wondered why you were still ordained. But part of what it was I have a lot of respect for my teachers. I do. I really respect the Tibetans and what they've done and what they do. So after Geshe Sopa died, I felt like I would be happy to give my robes back because I really didn't want to disappoint him. And it didn't make that much difference to me. I mean, I didn't really want to be, I was happy living by myself and I was happy. I wasn't really interested in, having a sexual relationship or anything like that. So it suited me. I just wanted to be myself. I just wanted to wear the clothes I wear and do what I wanted to do. And I want to go dancing and play music and, and so that's why. So then I gave them back and now I'm myself again. But then, I know then the thing that was a big surprise though, I didn't expect to meet somebody, that came a few years later. I know you wanted to ask about Jeff. So
yeah.
Then I met Jeff and that was just basically on a job, sort of a job. He invited me to come up and help him develop a retreat center, So I came up to Shetland and we just got on like a house on fire. And I didn't expect anything like that ever, because I kind of knew everybody and I wasn't going to get involved with somebody, I wasn't planning to. But all I can say was, it was just karma. I don't know what else to say other than we fell in love, and then it was just a lot of, it's this dependent arising thing. Like I was telling you before, these causes and conditions come together in your life and suddenly your life just shifts,
What's it like sharing your life so intimately with another person after so much time alone?
Well, we do have two different houses. So, because I still need time by myself. I'm so used to, even when I wasn't in retreat, like there were years when I was like director at Land Home Abiding, I'm still used to having, like 4 or 5 hours every day just to practice. And when I'm with him or when we're doing things, or when I'm traveling, that doesn't happen. And I start to feel like I'm a flower that's wilting. I have to get back to the garden. And he likes time by himself too. So we spend a lot of time not together. And I think that's how it works. We're old. It's one thing to, I was 64 when I met him and he was 69 or something like that. So it's not like we have kids and when you're older, it's just different, and, but we get along really, like we've never had an argument. And I think it's just a real testament to Buddhist practice because we're just patient and, like what we were talking about yesterday, you just let go. You just, okay, well, that's all right, and so I just felt like my life has been really wonderful. And it's like, okay, well, I had this, if you could put it like this, if my life was like a chocolate cake, he's like the chocolate icing that I didn't expect to be there. So he just makes my life better and he helps me immensely in all kinds of ways.
I wanted to talk to you a little, you actually mentioned wanting to talk about this also is, you've talked to me before about, and also other people I know who've done long retreat, how on the one hand, it's an extraordinary privilege to take that time to yourself and to, not have a job and so on. On the other, is very, very difficult. And not just, set aside just the mental difficulties, but getting enough money and space and a place and all like that. Can you just talk a little bit about the barriers and the privileges to a life of deep retreat, and also how people could learn from that, what lessons there are.
Well, what I would really like to see is within Buddhist organizations, a part of the organization that sets aside money to support people who want to do retreat. And I know that our teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, had talked about setting up a retreat fund, not just a Sangha fund, but a retreat fund. And I don't think that ever happened. Because when Lama Yeshe entreated us to create a Western Dharma culture, and I think the biggest obstacle is this kind of American idea that we can't ask for help. Because I know quite a few monks and people, not so much nuns, but monks who've lived at Land of Calm Abiding, and then they run out of money and they're like, oh, well, I have to go back to work now. And that's such a fallacy, but they don't have what I would call the courage or the training to be able to ask.
Yeah.
You have to be able to ask. And I didn't. I mean, it was Roger that got it, because we used up all our money in the first 8 years, preparing to do the retreat. And we got to do the retreat, doing all our nundros and everything. He said, oh, we're going to have to beg. And I'm like, what? Because I'm an American too, and it was terrifying to me, but I did it, and I realized that that one of the parts of Buddhism, that's the 8 freedoms and the 10 endowments. One of the 10 endowments is to live in a land where meditators are supported, where people are supported. So I used the logic, well, I'm making America a place where meditators are supported, and I still really believe in that. And all I did was I wrote letters to everybody I knew and asked them, would they send me $10 or $20 a month? And there were people who weren't Buddhists or anything, but they knew me, and they said, well, sure, that's not very much money. I can send them that. And that's how I did it. And then the most important part to say is that Geshe Yeshe Topten, who was one of these great yogis in Dharamsala, who later taught at Lama Tsongkhapa Institute and around, and his book on Shantideva is fantastic. But when he found out that that's how we lived and supported ourselves, he was overjoyed. And he said, he even hugged Roger. He said, you must continue to live this way for the rest of your life to prove to Western people that it's possible, that it can be done. Because it's the biggest obstacle to people getting realizations is thinking that they have to have a job and they have to support themselves. And he said in the West, you have places, you have books, you have teachers, but you don't have yogis. And you won't have Dharma until you have yogis. Because Dharma is not in the books. It's in the hearts and minds of people who hold the realizations. And that is something that the West doesn't get. And I don't know how to get that out there. But if there's anything I would want to broadcast around the world, is that we need yogis.
Yeah. There's one thing I'm very grateful to my mother for, is she always quoted Jesus to me. It's saying, ask and ye shall receive. But with everything, she's like, if you're looking for, give a call, ask.
Yeah.
But still, I find, even with people who've been Buddhists for a long time, like with Colby, we're quite good friends. Mm-hmm. And I find that I have to, like with his retreats, I would very explicitly, I'd say, tell me when you're going on retreat. I want to help support it, So even those of us trained in that who need the support, even then they're shy to ask.
Yeah.
So it's both sides. Like, I think we need to be less shy to ask, because you are giving people a gift and an opportunity to be generous. But also those of us who learn the benefits of generosity and retreat, to really proactively ask the people we know who want to be yogis and say, like, hey, listen, whenever you want to do this, come back to me. Because I found I have to tell people sometimes, like 6 times, even ordained people, I say, listen, I'm serious about this. When you're doing your retreat, come, and I'm going to give you some money to do it. It's my benefit. But I find it's like, it's not easy. It's not easy actually to make it happen.
Well, part of it is it's our ingrained low self-esteem.
Yeah.
That we have in our culture. I'm not good enough to ask. I can't ask. And I think in my case, I wanted to do the retreat so bad and I had no other way to do it. So it's like that. But it's really a shame that people feel that way. But you're right. It works from both sides. And maybe if we could just have a slush fund that people could draw on where it wouldn't be so personal. But in a way, it is one of the things that I've felt about being supported in retreat that I didn't mention. And one of the things you said, what was one of the good things about it was being supported in retreat. Because when I would have a down day, which I would, we have down days, but it was like, I can't give up because I'm doing this for these people. Yeah. They're real people that you're doing it for, and they have your picture, and they think about you, and you think about them, and so it really helps you in retreat if they're actual people that you're doing it for.
Paula, thank you so much for this interview. It's very kind of you to share so much about your experience so honestly, and I think in ways that are really going to benefit people who may have never even heard about a retreat or thought about it, to understand what the benefits are and how it could impact their lives practically. So thank you for everything you've done and for living an extraordinarily beneficial, good, exemplary life, at least from where I'm sitting.
Well, I think sometimes you don't really have much choice about life. It just goes, And you make the best of it, however you can,
Yeah.
But thank you, Scott. And, it's always fun to chat with you, and I hope it was helpful. The thing is, there's lots of causes and conditions that come together for things to manifest. And so when you ask me things, I just think about all the different causes and conditions. So it gets a bit complicated, but I hope it was okay.
It's perfect. Thank you. In the next episode, Paula leads a beautiful meditation. But before we hop off of this episode, Paula left me a voicemail the day after we spoke with a little bit she wanted to include that we didn't get into the interview.
Hi, Scott. I just wanted to thank you again for the opportunity to do something like that. And I guess I'm not used to talking about myself like that, So I realized later that I kind of left out the most important part about being in solitary retreat, which is that the practice itself nourishes you, and that when the practice is really working, you don't feel lonely because you just feel connected to all of reality, the whole planet and the stars and the earth and the trees and the people. And I also didn't say to tell people, what an amazing dream life you have, that because the daily life is just the same day after day after day, your dreams become extremely vivid and alive and lucid, and that in itself is just really exciting to be in a kind of a different state of mind. So that seemed like an important thing to say. And also the devotional aspect, how devotion is a very nourishing mind. But maybe that's not important for your listeners. Because it was a secular group, I kind of just focused on the outer stuff, but maybe that wasn't the point. So I just wanted to tell you that, maybe just to get it off my chest. But it was interesting, and I'm not used to doing things like that. So it was good. It was a good experience, and thanks a lot, and good luck with everything that you do. It's important work, and I just want you to know I really appreciate it. So thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for my conversation with Paula Chichester. If you'd like to know more about Paula's teachings and retreats, visit her website at braveview.org. I'd also like to encourage people who want to support long-term meditators to consider a donation to the Land of Calm Abiding, the retreat center where Paula spent many years in retreat, and where her friend and retreat partner Roger Monroe is still in retreat after 32 years. You can find them at landofcalmabiding.org. If you'd like to deepen this conversation, you can find my book, How to Train a Happy Mind, featuring a foreword by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, anywhere they sell books or audiobooks. You can also subscribe to our newsletter through the links on our website at howtotrainahappymind.org, and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. One of the best ways to connect with these practices is to join me in my weekly guided meditations at our Train a Happy Mind community, which you can join for free or by donation at trainahappymind.org. How to Train a Happy Mind is a nonprofit project of a skeptic's path to enlightenment, supported entirely by your donations. If you've ever enjoyed one of our podcast episodes or classes, please consider supporting us with a contribution of any size right now on our website at howtotrainahappymind.org. Thanks to Annie Nguyen for production and story editing, Christian Parry for mastering, and Isabella Acebal for marketing. We wish you a wonderful day.